Hey everyone, this is Vincent Salento welcoming you back to another episode of the Low Oxalate Kitchen podcast, where the goal is to make a low oxalate diet more simple and accessible to anyone who wants to follow it. This is part one of a two-part series with registered dietitian Melanie Betz. Melanie is board certified in renal nutrition and works in the nephrology department at the University of Chicago Medical Center. She's passionate about helping people with kidney stones and chronic kidney disease understand that healthy eating does not have to be complicated and can be delicious. Her research interests include ways to increase patient knowledge and adherence to healthy eating, frailty and ways to reduce risk for poor health outcomes in older adults, as well as research on plant-based diets. In her free time, she enjoys cooking, yoga, wine tasting, and cheering on her Michigan State Spartans. She also volunteers with the National Kidney Foundation of Illinois and the Healthy Aging Dietetic Practice Group. Melanie and I talk about the effects of dietary protein on kidney stone formation, as well as the effects of sugar intake. Melanie also took the time to answer some questions from the Low Oxalate Kitchen Facebook group. So if you enjoy the podcast and you want to leave a review wherever you're listening, that would be super helpful. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to reach out at any time. And I hope you enjoy this episode with Melanie Betz. Melanie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vincent. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
I thought we would just start with sort of how you got into nutrition, what made you want to go that direction, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. Honestly, I got into nutrition because the classes looked interesting in undergrad. I'm not gonna lie, I don't have any sort of like big dramatic story. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is I knew that I wanted to go into a field where I got to help people. And I also have always loved food. I love to eat. I love to cook. I just am very passionate about sort of all of the aspects of food, and nutrition and dietetics is what my undergrad degree is in, is kind of combine those two things.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I got into I studied exercise physiology in school,
Yeah.
and I got into it the same way. Classes sounded interesting, and I was always into sports and like interested in working out. So I was like, well, I guess I'll just do this.
Right, exactly. Might as well make a career out of it, right?
Yeah. Yep. And then, so where did you do your undergrad?
I went to Michigan State for undergrad, actually.
Okay.
Yep. So I was there for 4 years, and then I did grad school and completed my dietetic internship, which is sort of part of what you need in order to become a dietitian at Rush University in Chicago. So that's what brought me here about 10 years ago. Time flies. And I haven't left, so I'm still in Chicago.
Cool. Where are you from originally?
From Michigan, from the sort of mid-Michigan area, right around East Lansing, actually.
Cool. Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. And the dietetics internship, that's after undergrad, and then you're in grad school. How long is the internship for?
Yeah, so internships vary. Mine was 21 months because it combined the internship along with grad school. You don't necessarily have to have a master's in order to be a dietitian yet. That requirement is coming out actually in, a couple of years, but as of right now, you don't need to have a master's degree. So those internships range anywhere from like 6 months, honestly, up to 2 years or so. And then after you complete that internship, then you are eligible to sit for the registration, the RD exam.
Okay.
So, and then you can officially use that dietitian title.
Gotcha. Does that differ from state to state?
Nope,
or is that
nope.
one of the ones that's uniform throughout the country?
Yes, that is uniform throughout the country.
Okay.
And there are some states, most states, in fact, and Illinois is included, requires that dietitians be licensed. So that honestly is just having that RD credential and just paying, of course, a little bit of an extra fee to sort of the regulation board. So that differs from state to state, but the dietitian requirements is a national thing.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mhm.
Cool. And then how did you end up working with patients with kidney issues specifically? How did you sort of get into that?
Yeah. An opportunity opened up at the University of Chicago like 2.5 years ago. That's how long I've been working at the University of Chicago. That's my real job, if you will. And this job looked really interesting because it was more than just patient care. It also involved research and kind of working on other projects, and that's something that I really enjoy having in my job. I love seeing patients, but I like getting my hands dirty and all sorts of other things as well. And so I sort of just fell into it. And at the University of Chicago, I see patients with kidney stones and also all sorts of different kidney diseases, including, of course, just general sort of chronic kidney disease. But kidney stones have been something that's been really, really interesting to me, and I've learned so much. I feel like it's something that isn't covered in most nutrition programs. I honestly knew very, very little about it before, embarrassingly little. And so it's just been so interesting to learn everything that I have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that like there's, you don't really learn too much about it, I guess, in school or wherever. And then there's so much to learn. And
Hmm.
then you can sort of dive into that, but then there's still also so much that we don't know in general about it. So it is very
Yes.
interesting and like a good place to be, like a good place to do research.
Yes, absolutely. Um, yeah, there's just so much to know, and it's interesting because kidney stones are so common. It's
Yeah.
like 10% or so of the population has them, but there is such a little amount in, I think, pretty much all types of medical schooling. So I don't know. It's an interesting situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's 10% is how much like which percentage we know have kidney stones.
Correct. Yeah, those are just symptomatic. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What sort of research have you gotten involved with since you started at the University of Chicago?
Yeah, I've done just a couple projects here and there. I haven't been there too long. Most recently, I did a large study sort of looking into people with chronic kidney disease and understanding what they know about what they should or shouldn't be eating. And then seeing if that correlates to what they actually are eating, right? So if you know that sodium is bad for kidney disease, does that mean that you are eating less sodium? And unfortunately, that is not the case. At least that's what I found, and that's consistent with research in lots of different health conditions. So that leaves us questioning, how do we get patients to actually eat less sodium? How do we sort of incorporate that behavior change piece into education, which is a golden. If I had the answer to that, I would have millions of dollars.
Right. Yep. Yeah, you and every trainer and nutrition coach
Right,
and everyone out there, because
right,
I mean I'm sure that's the same across the board because everyone knows you're not supposed to eat sugar even in general or like, other
right.
stuff that's terrible for you. But I mean if you look at the the obesity crisis, I guess, like in especially in
Mhm.
the States.
Right. We know, right. Nutrition isn't rocket science,
Right.
right? Like most of us have some idea of what we should or shouldn't be
Hmm.
eating. But doing it is a completely different
Yeah,
thing. So,
for sure.
hmm.
So all of the stuff we're going to talk about either today or if we end up doing a round two, protein, sodium, sugar, calcium, how they all tie into kidney stones and the formation of kidney stones. They all come back to urine chemistry basically and how they change urine chemistry, how that changes the amount of calcium in your urine, the pH of your urine and all that sort of stuff. So I thought we'd do a quick urine chemistry lesson and sort of find out what do we need to know about how urine chemistry and stone formation kind of come together?
Yeah, and that is a big topic, but I think it sort of boils down into two big things that you need to remember. Um, Perhaps the most important is something called supersaturation. And as it relates to kidney stones, we most frequently talk about calcium and oxalate, right? Because we want to get less calcium and oxalate in our urine. And actually, most importantly, we want to reduce the amount of calcium in our urine. That seems to be the biggest driver of kidney stone formation. Not saying that oxalate isn't important, of course, but certainly don't forget about how important it is to really do everything we can to cut back how much calcium is in that urine. Um, I like if you think about going back to high school chemistry, you think about supersaturation. So basically, supersaturation is when there's so much of a solid or a thing in a liquid that it precipitates out, right? And it crystallizes. And that's what a kidney stone is. That's basically when there's too much of some solid in your urine and it forms those crystals, which we want to avoid at all costs.
Right.
Yes. When we talk about supersaturation, not only is it important to cut back how much stuff is in your urine, so that calcium and oxalate, but also increasing how much urine there is will reduce how saturated your urine is with those sort of bad things, if you will. And so that's really just drinking water, right? The more water you drink, the higher your urine volume will be, the lower supersaturation you'll have of all of these things that we don't want.
Right.
So, yeah, that's supersaturation in a nutshell.
Okay.
and then the other piece is urine pH, which gets, I think, even more complicated. But for most of our purposes, we really want to do everything we can to raise your urine pH, because calcium and oxalate are more likely to form a stone when your pH is too low. There are some stones that are more likely when your urine pH gets too high, but they're most notably calcium phosphate stones. But those are much less common. I think around 80% of kidney stones are calcium oxalate. So for most of the people listening to this podcast, we really want to do everything we can to raise that urine pH.
Right. So there's a lot packed in there, and I'm sure a lot of people have questions surrounding all that stuff. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that we sort of nail home is that the calcium in your urine is very important, and we want to reduce the amount of calcium in the urine, but that doesn't necessarily mean reducing dietary calcium, right?
No, not at
Okay.
all, which is super counterintuitive. Yes, that's a big point. And I know that in your previous podcast episodes, and I know that we'll talk about it later, but how much calcium you eat can really lower how much oxalate is in your urine, which is the sort of primary reason why we want to make sure that you are not cutting out how much calcium you eat. And we do know from sort of large studies that people who get in enough calcium and who eat dairy in some form are less likely to have kidney stones. So that is a super duper important point.
Right. Okay. And then you mentioned water intake also, because one of the ways to reduce the amount of calcium or oxalate in the urine is obviously to have less of either one of those in the urine. But to reduce the concentration, you can also increase your water intake. Is there a recommendation you have or guidelines for how much water to take in each day? Or
Yeah, for most people, it's going to be somewhere around 3 liters of fluid per day. What we really want to do is to make sure that you are producing at least 2.5 to 3 liters of urine a day. And so if you think about it, like pretty much all the water that you drink or eat, right? Because there is a fair amount of water in some foods, like watermelon is kind of the obvious example there, is going to come out in your urine. You do lose a little bit like from sweat or breathing, saliva, a little bit through feces, but most of that is going to come out in your urine. So the more water you drink, the more pee you have, which is a good thing. There are some caveats for people maybe who, for whatever reason, are having a lot of diarrhea. You're losing a ton of water that way, and so you those people would need to drink a lot more water to kind of make up for the losses in that loose stool. And the other common thing is actually if you're sweating a lot. So if you live in a hot area, or you're exercising a lot, or whatever it is that's making you sweat a lot, then you're going to have to drink even more water.
Right. So moral of the story is make sure you're producing at least, I think it was 2.5, you said, 2.5 liters of urine per day, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There's something interesting. I don't know if you've heard about the stone belt.
No.
Is that something that you've heard about? So basically it's a part of basically areas that are hotter temperatures.
Oh, right.
So like the South, there's more kidney stones. And of course there's that, correlation does not equal causation, but one of the likely reasons for that is because you're sweating more, it's hotter, and they actually project with global warming that the prevalence of kidney stones is going to go up for that same reason.
Interesting. Yeah, I can definitely see how that would affect it. Is there or how much does that change, I guess, that recommended water intake or urine output? How much does that change with like the weight of a person? Because it's going to be, I assume it'll be different from someone who's like, 150 pounds versus 250, or right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, it doesn't change too much because 3 liters is so much above what sort of your body needs at a baseline to function. Pretty much everyone, except maybe in the extremes on either end, should be consuming about 3 liters of water to prevent those stones.
And then you also mentioned urine pH, which is very important, and something that always comes up whenever you are searching nutrition and pH, and sort of those two things together, is this idea of alkaline diets, and drinking, I guess it's alkaline water or alkaline foods or whatever it is you can sort of find out there on the internet. What's your take on alkaline diets and how they sort of fit into to kidney stones and kidney disease?
Yeah. I think an alkaline diet actually can be a good thing, but my definition of an alkaline diet may be very different than what you find on Google. So like drinking the alkaline waters and I don't know. There's so much stuff out there. May have if you drink enough of that alkaline water, it may actually reduce or increase the pH of your urine. But really, what matters in terms of acid and base in your body is eating a diet that does not produce a ton of acid. And what foods produce acid are very different than what foods are acidic. So basically protein, when your body metabolizes protein, it produces quite a bit of acid, and then your kidneys have to sort of get rid of that extra acid, which creates more acidic urine, which is what we don't want. And I know we'll talk a lot more about protein later, but that's one of the biggest reasons why we don't want to eat too much protein from a kidney stone standpoint, because the byproduct of that protein is acid, and that will make your urine more acid. On the flip side of that, foods that produce base or alkali in your body are fruits and vegetables. They have a lot of specifically potassium, magnesium, and calcium in them, which all of those things basically produce base in your body. So you want to eat as much of those as possible and a moderate amount of protein. And then sort of the balance of those things will equal a more normal urine pH. Did that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like that difference between what a food produces in terms of pH is really different. Like a tomato, for example, is actually an alkaline food. Like we all know tomatoes are acidic themselves, but when you eat them, they actually produce base in the body, which is a really important difference.
Right. Yeah. There's a long way to go from your mouth and then stomach, all the way to the kidney, so
exactly.
yeah. And there's I always, from the first time I heard about an alkaline diet and like drinking the water with like a little bit different pH, I like it never sounded. It sounded like there might be something there ish, but that everything I was reading was not. There, it just didn't seem like it would it would hold up, or that it was thought through all the way. There just always seemed like there was something missing, and I'm so happy that that we connected and that you were able to sort of explain it to me in a way that was scientific still and like rooted in science, but like just kind of confirmed what I was suspecting, I guess, that there was something missing. And I'm so glad that you provided like the missing puzzle piece, because I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, it's a weird concept. The fancy scientific word for the amount of acid that a food produces is called potential renal acid load, or PRAL, PRAL. So if you want to look into it a little bit more and get super sciencey, you can look into that. I actually have a blog post about PRAL on my website if you want to check it out, and that will kind of give you a little bit more information about it. And there's a list of which foods are high PRAL and low PRAL and all that good stuff.
Right. And that's your site is thekidneydietitian.org, right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, so we'll definitely have a link to the to your site and to that specific article for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So let's jump into protein. We sort of touched on it a little bit with the pH, but how does protein sort of relate in the big picture to kidney stones?
Yeah. So pH is really the most important point. So we know when we eat more protein, our body is going to produce more acid, which has to leave the body in our urine mostly. And that increases your risk of kidney stones. So that's a big one. The other thing that too much protein can do is increase how much calcium is in your urine. So if we go back to that supersaturation piece of the urine chemistry lesson, too much calcium in our urine is increasing the risk of stones. So the main mechanism for protein doing that is actually going back to that acid again. So our body has to buffer all of that acid. And one way, the biggest way that it does that is actually by releasing calcium from our bones. Which isn't great because one, that makes our bones more weak, and two, that means that calcium is eventually going to leave our bodies in the urine. So those are kind of the two big ways that protein increases the risk of kidney stones.
Gotcha. Does any of that calcium that is released from the bones to sort of buffer the acid, once it hits the kidney, if it's not bound to oxalate to make a stone, is any of that reabsorbed into the body and then sort of deposited back into the bones, or is most of it sort of excreted in the urine once it gets there?
Most of it is likely going to be excreted in the urine. Certainly some will be reabsorbed depending on lots of different factors, but most of it is going to be excreted in the urine.
Gotcha.
Especially for people who form kidney stones. There's differences between people, and this is especially sensitive mechanism in people with stones.
Okay. We're supposed to then limit in order to avoid forming too many kidney stones or too large of a kidney stone or starting to form kidney stones. Supposed to limit the amount of protein. How much protein per day does that look like? Is there a recommendation there?
Yeah. So it's, I would talk to a dietitian if you can about what an exact number is for you. But for most people, it's 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight you are. And that's going to differ. There's some adjustments that if you are overweight or obese, there's some adjustments that you need to do. But that's sort of a good starting point, is that 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight.
Okay. And that's I did the math beforehand because I didn't want to be put on the spot while we're doing this. It's 0.36 grams per pound if you want to do it that way. Yep, also.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah. So for example, I'm 200 pounds. So I think it came out to 72 grams of protein per day, which is, if you live in the States and are eating a typical American diet, it's very easy to get to 72 grams.
Very, very easy. Yes.
Right. So, you recommend sort of mixing in animal and vegetable protein together, right? To sort of limit, like the bigger doses from the animal protein.
Exactly, yeah. And a lot of that is because we are eating too much protein. The average American eats somewhere around 1.2 grams per kilogram, so that's a lot more than our recommended zero point 0.8.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think the benefits of vegetable protein are name mostly is because there's just so much less protein in them, right? So like just 3 ounces of chicken or beef or pork or whatever has around 25 grams of protein, and 3 ounces of chicken is pretty small. That's like a deck of cards, right? We've all heard that before.
Right.
Whereas a whole half cup of, say, beans, and I know those are higher oxalate, but beans, it's going to be only like 8 grams of protein. And so healthfully figuring out ways to incorporate some of those vegetable proteins um, can help you stay within your protein goal per day, because it can be difficult for people because it is so different than what most of us are used to eating. Plus we're in a very pro protein culture, if you will.
Hmm.
Everyone, protein is good for you and more is obviously better is what a lot of the messages that we hear, and that's certainly not the case for kidney stones especially.
Yeah, and if you're looking for a lower oxalate vegetable or bean to get your protein from, black-eyed peas are low oxalate, chickpeas, most
Hmm.
lentils. So if you're looking for a little substitution there, that's those are good options for that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think kidney beans are somewhere in the middle too. Navy beans are real high, so I would avoid those. But I think kidney beans are somewhere in the middle. And just like when you eat any food, honestly, just making sure to have the calcium with it to bind that oxalate is key. Yeah,
Yep.
don't go out and just start eating tons of beans without that calcium. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned too that it's sort of like built into the culture now that, protein is good for you because I mean you can sort of find it in everything now. It's, in besides just the powders, there's added protein to everything.
Hmm.
And I remember learning in school too because, there's always, especially in weightlifting communities and people that are really into fitness, like everyone just like eats protein all day, like make sure you have
Hmm.
protein after your workout. And like I've gotten a couple questions too from people that are, trying to stay in shape and are really interested in working out and they don't want to limit their protein because they think it's going to have some sort of, some negative effect on, I don't know the layman's term for it, their gains, I guess, in like the pro lifting world. But
Yeah.
they're like their progress, I guess. But I remember even reading in school that zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram is the recommended amount for regular people who aren't really working out, but also even for people that are on some sort of exercise plan, because the body
Yes.
can only process or break down or do whatever it has to do with so much protein per day.
Right. There's no research to show that eating more protein is going to mean more muscle mass or anything like that.
Right.
The caveat being if you are Michael Phelps or
Right.
you're exercising like a ridiculous amount, and also some other health conditions do require more protein. If you're acutely ill, you're malnourished, right? Like we get into that, and then yes, those people certainly need more protein. Older adults actually may need a little bit more as well. But for most of the people that I imagine are listening to this podcast, and most of the people I work with, zero point 0.8 is completely acceptable.
Right. Right. And if you're working out but you're not going to the Olympics, like
Right.
don't worry about it. Like, you'll
Right.
be okay.
Yes.
I've even heard about because a lot of people, they want to take, they want to have a protein shake or whatever after their workout, immediately after their workout, because
Hmm.
that's sort of been kind of ingrained into the culture too, that like having protein right after your workout will like sort of get it right to the muscles and like, help you rebuild and all that stuff. But
Hmm.
I feel like the latest stuff that's coming out is leaning more towards sort of just getting your protein whenever during the day, throughout the day. And it kind of like getting it all right after your workout doesn't even have a significant effect over getting the same amount throughout the day.
Hmm. Yes. Yeah. And in fact, if you were sort of getting all or a majority of your protein right after your workout, or at one time, no matter when it is. Your body can only use so much protein at one given meal or snack for
Mm-hmm.
muscle growth. And that's about 30 grams or so, they think. So if you had, and you could easily eat 90 grams of protein, whether it's like from meat or these protein shakes, like they can have
Mm-hmm.
so much crazy stuff in them.
Yep.
Um, you're not helping your muscles at all,
Right.
and you could be harming your kidneys.
Right. So, you have some tips for preparing meals lower in animal protein?
Yeah, I think, I certainly am not saying that everyone needs or even should go vegetarian. But I think just kind of being mindful of how much meat you are eating. And when I say meat, I mean any sort of animal protein. So that's like poultry, beef, chicken, pork, even fish. In terms of everything that we've talked about has the same effect. Of course, fish is more heart healthy, and we want to stay away from lots of red meat from a heart sort of general health standpoint, but from an acid base kidney stone standpoint, animal protein is animal protein, honestly. Um, and so just being mindful of those portions. My favorite thing to do is to kind of mix your animal protein into a dish. So I find it much easier to keep my portions small when I mix chicken into a stir fry, for example, or a pasta dish with roasted vegetables, instead of having a piece of chicken as my meal. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just easier to eat less of it than when it's mixed into something than if it's just a piece of meat.
Right. Cool. Um, okay, so there's two more things you mentioned, or we mentioned rather, while we're talking offline. Two different effects that protein has related to kidney stones, besides the increases in urine calcium and lowering urine pH. So, talk to us a little bit about oxalate formation in the liver and how it sort of relates to protein.
Yeah, you really just hit it. So we we know that oxalate comes not only from the oxalate that we eat, but also our body can make oxalate, and we can make oxalates from some of the byproducts of protein metabolism, some of the amino acids that protein is made of. And so, uh, potentially, lots of protein can create more oxalate in our urine as well, which is, of course, something that we want to avoid at all cost.
Right. Do we know which amino acids it is that contributes to,
Uh,
to that?
we do know. I do not know them off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I can look into that for you.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I'm very curious too, so I'm going to look into it, and then we'll
Mhm.
maybe we can post a link for anyone who's more interested in diving into that. I'm curious if it has anything to do with branch chain amino acids versus not, um,
Mhm.
because I know that there's supplements out there too that people take with branch chain that are just the
Mhm.
branch chain amino acids.
Right.
So
In the
if it's those
weightlifting
that,
world.
yeah, so if it's those
Hmm.
that convert, then it um, might be an issue.
Hmm.
And then there's one other factor you said that relates protein to kidney stones.
Yeah. So, specifically, animal protein is high in something called purines, which get broken down into uric acid in our bodies, and uric acid gets excreted in our urine. And so that's bad for two reasons. One, if you have very high amounts of uric acid in your urine, you can actually form uric acid stones. And so, if any of your listeners do form uric acid stones, then it's critical, super duper important to avoid lots of animal protein. But for most of us that form calcium oxalate stones, uric acid actually makes that calcium and oxalate more likely to combine and crystallize. So that's sort of another reason why it's important to keep those animal protein portions to our moderate amount, because we want to keep the amount of uric acid in our urine down as much as possible.
Right. Is there any other foods off the top of your head that are high in purines that
Mhm.
can contribute to this also?
Yeah, beer is one of them.
Oh
Um,
man.
I know. Sorry.
Is it all kinds?
It is all kinds.
Oh no.
Wine is much less.
Okay.
Yeah, but beer is a common one. And then the other very common source is, and this is animal protein too, but like any sort of processed meat, so like bacon, sausage, hot dogs, um, those things have exceptionally high purine in them, so you want to avoid those. In addition, of course, to the salt,
Hmm.
the purine content is another reason to stay away from that type of food.
Interesting. Is it because of the whatever they use to cure those meats, or is it something else that's going on in the processing?
Yeah, it's added at some point during the processing. I honestly am not sure if that's specifically the curing piece, or just like the preservative piece. But yeah, for whatever reason, those foods are much higher.
Hmm. Bummer.
Hmm.
Um. All right. So, and there's one other one too that I know off the top of my head, just because it's um, used as a substitute a lot, which is sunflower seeds, um,
Mm-hmm.
that are high in purines. Unfortunately, most nuts and seeds are pretty high in oxalate, so they're
Mm-hmm.
sort of out of the picture for most people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sunflower seeds is one of the substitutions that people use, and there's also sunflower seed butter, which
Yep,
is
sun butter.
yeah, which is really
Hmm.
good because I miss peanut butter a lot.
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
but yeah, so I mean, if that's a concern for you, if especially if you have uric acid stones, maybe stay away from
Hmm.
sunflower seed butter too.
Yeah, and if you're fortunate enough to be working with a nephrologist who is doing 24-hour urine tests on you, those 24-hour urine tests will tell you how much uric acid is in your urine. And that's so important for so much of what we talk about, because what's right for someone is so specific to those results, right?
Hmm.
So there's lots of people who form calcium oxalate stones who have totally normal uric acid, and we don't you wouldn't have to worry about sunflower seeds at all. So it's important to kind of know what your body is doing to sort of tailor your diet best,
Right.
and not be overly restrictive.
You the way you said that kind of made me think a little bit. Are there doctors that don't, or doctors that have patients with kidney stones that don't do 24-hour collections?
Um, my understanding, yes. I'm fortunate enough to work in a place where they do, but I definitely know people who don't have formed like one or two kidney stones. But yes, I've definitely um, have heard like through Instagram and through places that sometimes those 24-hour urine tests aren't done. And if you do find yourself in that situation, just ask your doctor, right? Like
Hmm.
it's all of our jobs to sort of take responsibility for our health, and just ask to do it. The
Yeah.
worst they can say is no.
Right. And even if they do say
Yeah.
no, I mean, you should push a little bit.
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. Or
'Cause
maybe
that's
find another doctor if they're
yeah.
if
I was
they're
gonna.
really that
Yeah.
opposed to it. Yeah, it's
Right.
definitely the best way to care for someone with kidney stones, and you get everything that you need basically to
Yeah.
treat them. So,
And
yeah.
even if your insurance doesn't cover it, this happened to me. I don't know. It was uh, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. For some reason, I didn't have insurance at the point that I had that 24-hour collection. Um, but it only costs like $250, I think, which
Oh,
you know
okay.
is a lot,
It's a
but
lot, but in the grand
it's
scheme of
so
things,
worth it. Yeah, because
yeah,
I mean the kind of information you get from it is
invaluable.
yeah, it's crucial.
Hmm.
Yeah. All right, cool. So let's jump into sugar and how excess sugar in the diet affects kidney stone formation.
Yeah. So sugar, it's one of those things. We all know sugar is not the best for us, right?
Hmm.
It most notably increases the risk of heart disease, actually, but it also can increase urine calcium. It all comes back to that supersaturation. And the way that happens is sort of a complicated web of things that results from too much insulin. So when you have a lot of carb, but specifically sort of refined sugar, your body releases excess insulin, which causes all sorts of changes, which ultimately results in that increase of calcium in your urine. It also will, sort of the end of those changes with excess insulin is your kidneys are going to reduce reabsorption of calcium, which equals more calcium in the urine, more calcium being excreted. Um, yeah, so that's ultimately what will happen. Um, in addition, too much sugar will cause your body to release more calcium from the bone as well. So yeah, you kind of got lots of things happening with that sugar.
Okay. So it's sort of similar to protein, with the effects of calcium in the urine, in that it increases, it pulls from the bone, right? And then ends up in the urine. But you said it also affects the reabsorption in that case?
Yes. Yep. I don't know how much listeners know about kidney physiology, but all nutrients, pretty much all electrolytes, as they go through the kidney, your body sort of has a last chance to pull some of those back, a last chance to say, no, I actually need that in my body. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's called reabsorption. And so, with too much sugar, your body actually reduces how much calcium it pulls back into the body, so that's not good because then your body sort of needs that calcium. Plus, there's more calcium in your urine, which increases that risk of stones.
Right. Okay. And this is true for regular sugar, whether it's, just table sugar that you're throwing in your coffee, or any sort of hidden sugars that you can find in all sorts of foods, even foods that you would just like. Maybe it's just me, but I lose my mind whenever I see.
It's surprising, right?
Yeah, there's sugar in everything, and it doesn't
Yep.
just say sugar on the label. It's hidden in all kinds of forms, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Label reading is so important for so many reasons. Sodium, I feel like, right? We talk about label reading and sodium all the time, but
Mm-hmm.
looking at the ingredients as well for sugar. Vincent, you had some really good examples here, like corn syrup, rice syrups. Of course, high fructose corn syrup is a common one, um, which brings up a good point. So all sugar is going to have this effect, but fructose in particular has shown sort of a more significant effect on calcium in the urine, and so avoiding fructose or high fructose corn syrup in particular, just because there's so much more of it in those foods,
Mm-hmm.
is especially important.
Yeah, and you know, avoiding the higher doses of fructose is the key. That doesn't mean, because fructose is fruit sugar, basically, right? The sugar that's
Right.
found in most fruits, but that doesn't mean to cut out fruits from your diet, because there's
Definitely
only,
not.
there is fructose in there, but it's a much smaller amount than what you would find in those syrups and all
For
that
sure.
stuff.
For sure. And you have to look at the trade-off too, right? There's a tiny bit of fructose in there, but fruit also has all this good stuff that prevents kidney stones, and has fiber and all this other very, very healthy stuff in there, obviously, right? So,
Yeah.
yes, I definitely would not say cut back on fruit. Probably more fruit, but the high fructose concentrations in corn syrup is the problem, which, for the record, are most commonly found in drinks, pop, sweet tea.
Right.
That's one of the major sources of those in our diets generally.
Yeah. Soda for those East Coasters.
Yes, right.
Cool. And then so there's the not so fancy ways they tried to hide syrup on labels, like corn syrup, rice syrup, high fructose corn syrup. But then there's also the fancy ways, which they'll put pure cane sugar to try and make it sound healthy. They'll say
Mm-hmm.
coconut
Right.
sugar, which is just
Organic
sugar
sugar.
from, right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, even if it sounds healthy, it's probably
It's all
still
the
sugar,
same.
and you should
It's all the
probably still,
same.
yeah.
Yep.
And I've even heard about, like, everyone is sort of, I feel like it's kind of on the way down now, but everyone was definitely for a while on the fake sugar bandwagon, like with Splenda and all those other sort of chemical, like man-made, I guess, substitutes,
Mm-hmm.
which were popular because they don't show, or they don't cause like an immediate spike in insulin. But I've been reading that it does cause a spike. It's just delayed. So you're still getting the same. Maybe it's not exactly the same as the real sugar, but it's still an insulin spike, which is not good.
Right, right. Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff coming out with sugar substitutes. My general recommendation for those is kind of like for everything, but especially sugar substitutes is a little is okay, right? Like once in a while, totally cool. But if you're having 3 Diet Cokes a day, then maybe that's not the best for among other reasons too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let's jump into some of the listener questions. These came from either the Low Oxalate Kitchen Facebook page or group, or my Instagram page, and they're just questions that people had related to kidney stones that they thought would be good for you to answer. So we get a lot of questions about which list is best for figuring out how much oxalate is in different foods. So University of Chicago has a link on its website, and I think it goes to the Harvard list, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the Harvard list is sort of considered the gold standard for the oxalate content. And I know that your first podcast talked a little bit about this, and he's definitely the expert. But basically, the way that they used to measure oxalate wasn't the most accurate, which has contributed to a lot of misinformation out there on Google about which foods have oxalate and how much and all that good stuff. So the gold standard is that Harvard list. But the caveat being, of course, the Harvard list doesn't have everything on it. And my understanding is that they are not actively updating it. I think the last time it was posted, which I think is the first time it was posted, is like 2007 or something. So look at that list. And if there's a food that isn't on that list, kind of use your best judgment.
Yeah. And I mentioned this on the first podcast too. There's a group called Trying Low Oxalates on Facebook, and they've sort of compiled all of the oxalate values from the Harvard list and other sources. And they do updates every 6 months or a year or whenever. They'll send out foods to be tested for their oxalate content, and Dr. Liebman, who was in the first episode, he does some of the testing for the samples that they send out. So if there's something you can't find on the Harvard list, or if you want to like look in a little bit more detail and get a little bit more in-depth breakdown, they have values for soluble and insoluble oxalate, and like different serving sizes and different brands of the same type of food. So that's kind of like, if you're interested in spending your time diving into a spreadsheet with numbers everywhere, if that seems attractive to you like it does to me, then go for it. Otherwise, the Harvard list is perfectly fine, right?
Yes. And I will say the Harvard list is great, but sometimes the portion sizes are a little wonky. They're not standardized across the board. Like you're comparing like a half cup of cereal to 1 cup of cereal, you know what I mean? So I actually took the Harvard list and standardized the portion sizes. And if you go to my website, there's everything that's on that list, but in a standard portion size. So I don't know if that's helpful too.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I mean, portion size is pretty much the number one factor that affects if you can call a food low or high oxalate or whatever, you know?
Right.
Yeah, so that's super important. Awesome. Yeah, I didn't know you did that. That's great. We'll definitely have a link to that too. All right. So, and then is there any snack ideas that you have that are low in oxalate and sort of fit the whole profile of sort of lower in protein and not likely to increase urine calcium and all that stuff?
Yeah. I think snacks are hard because I think what we sort of traditionally immediately think about with snacks is lots of really salty stuff, right? Like potato chips and pretzels and that sort of thing. So sort of changing your mind about what maybe a snack could be. Of course, I'm a dietitian, so I have to say fruits and vegetables. So fruit, I think, is the best snack ever because most of them are sort of pre-portioned and they're portable and it's easy. So, like an apple, a peach, whatever, that's obviously a great option. My favorite snack is popcorn.
Mm-hmm.
I am a popcorn addict, and I make it on the stove. So I literally buy the kernels, I pop it in canola oil, and then I can add just a pinch of salt, or there's all sorts of fun seasonings that you can make at home. So then they're lower in sodium that you can add to them if you get bored with that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
On my website, again, I have a recipe for a ranch popcorn mix that's pretty delicious. It's low in sodium. Um,
Cool.
so popcorn is probably my second recommendation. And then with vegetables, doing things to make them more exciting, right? So some people are cool with just plain carrot sticks, but I get bored with that. So
Mm-hmm.
using kind of making your own dip out of yogurt is a great option because then you're getting in that calcium. So you can do that. You can even do a little bit of hummus. Those garbanzo beans are generally um, lower in oxalate. There is, but just keeping portion size in mind if you do go the hummus route. But
Mm-hmm.
yogurt dip is an option. It's an excellent option.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out my own recipe for hummus too because a lot of them have tahini in them.
Tahini.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so the sesame seeds can be super high, especially if they're not. I just learned that I was looking through the spreadsheet for I don't even know how long the other day, and it turns out that there's I'm sure other people knew this, but I didn't. That sesame seeds have shells on them,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they're sold or put on stuff either shelled or not. And the shell of the sesame seed is where most of the oxalate is.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're unshelled, then they'll be lower. They're still kind of high, but not as high as they would be if they still had the shell on them. But you never know which ones are going um,
Tahini.
into
Mm-hmm.
tahini or anything else. Yeah, or how much. I don't know how much do they have to put in to get like the flavor of it. Because they're very like
Yeah.
very flavorful. You just need a little bit, but I don't know how much they put in there.
Right, right. And I think, that's going back to portion size, which is so key.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the tahini really sort of adds that creaminess to hummus.
Right.
If you make it without it, it's sort of chunky, which is still, it's good, but it doesn't have the same, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, full flavor and
Right.
mouthfeel. Yeah, so making it at home, then you can add just a little bit of that tahini, or just portion size, right, of the hummus itself. If you do want to buy your own hummus,
Yeah. And you mentioned ranch popcorn. That's
yeah, so
incredible. I know ranch goes on
good.
everything. I didn't even think to make like a ranch flavoring and put it on popcorn. That's an awesome idea.
Yeah, it's made out of non-fat, or sorry, dry buttermilk actually. So then it kind of has that creamy flavor a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
that powder, and then there's like dill and garlic powder, onion powder, and some other spices in there, and just a tiny bit of salt. Yeah, it's really good. I make, especially since I've been home during quarantine, I've been making that an embarrassing amount.
Cool. All right. So let me sort of throw in the super sciencey questions too. Like I'll mix them in. Does another question here? Does dietary phosphorus increase blood and or urine phosphorus content?
Yeah. So, assuming your kidneys are working the way that they should, I'm assuming your GFR is high, which for most people with kidney stones it is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the amount of phosphorus that you eat does not impact how much phosphorus is in your blood because your kidneys get rid of it appropriately. um, but that meaning that your kidneys get rid of it, so it would increase the amount of phosphorus in your urine. If you have kidney disease or a low GFR for whatever reason, if you eat too much phosphorus, then it could increase how much phosphorus is in your blood. The amount of phosphorus in your urine is not a big concern from a kidney stone standpoint for the vast majority of people, so I wouldn't really worry about it too much.
Okay. You mentioned GFR. For anyone who doesn't know, can you give a quick,
Yeah.
just a quick
Yep.
overview of what that is?
Sure. So GFR stands for glomerular filtration rate, which is just the rate at which your kidneys filter blood, basically. And it's pretty much on a scale of 100. So if your GFR is around 100, that means your kidneys are working at about 100%. Um, And that GFR actually is what dictates the level of kidney disease that you have. So, for example, a GFR of between 30 to 60, which means that your kidneys are working from 30 to 60%, means that you have stage 3 kidney disease. As it drops lower than that, then you're going to progress to CKD stage 4 and 5. Higher than that is stage 1 and 2.
Gotcha. Okay. How does vitamin D affect urine calcium and kidney stones if it does?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of research in this. We know that, well, back up. So one of the functions of vitamin D is to actually increase the absorption of calcium in our intestines. So if you have like super high doses of vitamin D, which many people take, since vitamin D is another one of those things in our culture that is supposed to be curing all ailments. So if you're taking these super high mega doses, your body could sort of be over absorbing calcium from your intestines, which ultimately means there's more calcium in your urine. And we have found in big studies that these mega doses of vitamin D have been associated with more urine calcium. So bottom line is many of us do need vitamin D supplementation, especially those of us in the north where we don't see any sun. But just don't take giant amounts. Most of us need somewhere around 1,000 international units IUs per day. It's also something that your doctor can check, and you can sort of titrate how much you take based on your blood levels of vitamin D as well.
Right. And if you're curious, how much you might need or what your levels are at next time you go to the doctor, just ask. I mean, they should be able to order that, no problem.
Yes.
And that kind of goes for, like we mentioned it before too, with the 24-hour urine collection. I mean, that one's a little bit more in depth, and they, with insurance and all that stuff, they have to put a code to, what is it, like, to verify that you have some sort of condition that warrants this test.
Yeah, for most insurances, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, this kind of stuff is, is important, and is worth a little bit of push if need be, Right. And then if your doctor is not willing to work with you, then it's probably a good sign that, like you said before, it's time to find someone else, maybe.
Yes, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah. So vitamin D, like everything else, good if it's the right dose, but don't overdo it, pretty much, right?
Right.
Cool.
Like with everything.
Yeah.
Too much of a good thing. Yes.
Right. So someone else asked if there were changes in, like, the recommendations for protein or anything else really with different conditions, like if someone has PKD or MSK, sort of maybe like, I assume they would have to go, and ask their own doctor, but is there any like general recommendations for that sort of thing?
Yeah, that is a giant question. And in short, yes, there are definitely different diet recommendations for those different conditions. And generally, a lot of what drives those nutrition recommendations is what your GFR is, what that glomerular filtration rate is. For pretty much everyone with any sort of kidney ailment, you want to avoid too much sodium. So that's pretty much universal. But then when you get into lower GFRs, it gets a little bit more complicated. Protein, for example, changes quite a bit. So protein for most people with a GFR of, say, above 30, you probably should be consuming around 0.8. So what we recommend for people with kidney stones as well. But as your GFR drops lower than 30, it might be appropriate to go even lower, actually. Some people say even 0.3 to 0.6 grams per kilogram, depending on many different factors. And then that changes again if you find yourself on dialysis. And at that point, you actually need a lot of protein. You actually need more like 1.2 grams per kilogram. of protein. So that changes quite a bit. I could talk for hours about this. The other thing that changes is potassium. So for the vast majority of people, we want to eat a lot of potassium. High potassium diet is going to help with kidney stones. It's going to help control blood pressure and all sorts of other good things. But as your GFR gets very low, your kidneys can't get rid of potassium as well as they should, which can cause high potassium levels in the blood. But that only happens for some people, not everyone. And so if you do find that your blood potassium is high consistently, then some people actually have to cut back how much potassium they eat. But again, that's super dependent on you and your labs and your kidney function. There's lots of other things to consider. So I think the bottom line is ask to see a dietitian,
Right.
And they will help you figure out what's best for you, your kidney function, and also your other medical history, right? Like if you have maybe diabetes or maybe high cholesterol or whatever it is, a dietitian is the best person to kind of put all those recommendations together and help you figure out what's best for you.
Yeah. You mentioned that potassium could be beneficial for people with kidney stones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that kind of plays into this acid-base piece we were talking about earlier. Potassium produces alkali in the body, basically. So more potassium, more alkali to help raise that urine pH and offset any protein that you do eat.
Is there an upper limit for dietary potassium?
Oh gosh, I am not sure if there's a formal upper limit for potassium. It would be virtually impossible to reach it via food,
Okay.
as with most upper limits.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if you're just getting potassium from fruits and vegetables like we should be, I would not worry about it at all because most of us are so far below eating how much potassium we should be.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I can look that up to see if there's an actual upper limit for potassium. And that would only be concerning if you were taking supplements, especially that weren't prescribed by your doctor.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know potassium supplements, if taken in excess, can be a very big problem. So that's definitely something that's not one of those things you want to just have as much as you feel like.
Right. And I will say a lot of times kidney stone patients are taking potassium citrate that is recommended by their doctor, primarily for that citrate factor, which will hinder crystallization of stones. So that, of course, is completely okay. And certainly take that if your doctor has recommended that. And one of the things they do check often when people are taking potassium citrate is how much potassium is in your blood to make sure that your kidneys are getting rid of it the way that they should.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't want potassium building up in the blood. That's
that does bad things.
Yes. Very bad things.
Yes.
So that's the reason that potassium citrate is, even though it seems innocuous, is prescribed, even though it is available in pill form, I think, but super low doses. And the higher doses are the pills that you get, the potassium citrate ones that are from the doctor, are usually extended release so that too much potassium doesn't get absorbed all at once and then built up. I guess the last one here, do you have any tips for maintaining a low oxalate diet in general?
Yeah, it's tough. I know that it's hard. And I think my biggest advice is to not drive yourself crazy with the numbers. Like if you find that there was a couple pieces of spinach in a salad, like it's cool, like you'll be okay. I think looking at kind of the big picture, right, and not fixating on these sort of tiny details. Of course, we know that there's some foods that we should avoid at all costs, whenever possible. But as long as you are eating even those higher oxalate foods in context and that you're getting in that calcium, which is so important, it's getting in that calcium, I think everything sort of evens out in the end.
Yeah, for sure. And, if you find yourself obsessing over the numbers of oxalate and you're getting overwhelmed by that or tired of that, maybe try and figure out another area that you can sort of focus on, maybe how to, like, making sure that your protein content is where it should be, and trying to think of other ways to avoid sugars.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think sort of when you had no idea what healthy eating for kidney stones looks like, and then you sort of stumble across all this information, it can be overwhelming. And working on making one change at a time and focusing on one thing really promotes sort of lasting change. Like, anyone can follow any diet for 3 days, but you're likely not going to be able to do that for a long time if you change everything at once. So working on whatever seems most doable for you. So for a lot of people, it's just getting in that water, because that's probably the most important thing of anything. It's just getting in that water.
Yeah.
And then once that sort of becomes habit, then maybe you'll tackle the oxalate thing, or then maybe you'll tackle the protein thing, kind of breaking it down into pieces that seem manageable to you.
Yeah. You definitely want to play the long game. Especially if you're doing this diet for kidney stones. You have, plenty of time to get it right. So
yes.
don't
your whole life.
don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So I think next time we'll cover, we'll come back, we'll do a round 2, and we'll cover salt, sodium, how that affects kidney stones. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit more about calcium. Yeah. And then, so you have your site, thekidneydietitian.org. You're also on Instagram, right? Where else can people find you?
Yeah, Instagram and my website are definitely the main two. I do have a Facebook page, which is also just the Kidney Dietitian. But go check out my blog. I'm slowly working on putting more content up there and putting up recipes. And I have a low oxalate section. Like, I have recipes kind of for all kidney patients, but I've categorized some that are low oxalate. So you can check out that sort of subsection of my recipes. Yeah.
Cool. And you also have some new stuff coming out. Did you want to talk about that too?
Yeah, so I am planning on releasing a e-cookbook sometime in the next few months, which I'm very excited about. One of the most common things I hear from patients is that they're so sick of just drinking milk and eating yogurt to get in their calcium, which is totally fair. Those things get old. And so this cookbook is totally focused on sort of novel, unique ways to sneak that dairy into your diet. So maybe making dips out of it, or whatever it is, different ways to sort of hide it and make it not feel like you're just drinking milk all day. So keep an eye out for that.
Cool. Definitely will do that. And then, so for anyone listening, if you're looking for links to anything we talked about, you can find those in the show notes. And then Melanie and I are also considering doing some live events, maybe like an Instagram live or something like that. So if that's something you would be interested in, definitely let us know. We'll have people submit questions beforehand, and then you can join us live and ask your questions there too if you want. So if that's something you think you'd be into, definitely let us know. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening, and Melanie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see everyone next time. All right, if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Melanie. If you want to check out her blog, it's thekidneydietitian.org. She's on Instagram as the Kidney Dietitian. It's kidney dietitian, and also on Facebook. And her Twitter is the Kidney RD. Definitely follow her if you're interested in staying up to date on all things kidney nutrition related. Please let us know if you enjoyed the show. We plan on doing another episode to talk about the effects of calcium and also of sodium on kidney stone formation and prevention. And we'll probably answer a few more questions from listeners also. So if you have a question for Melanie, send me a message on Instagram or Facebook, or send me an email at lowoxalatekitchen@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to answer it. If you like the show and want to leave a review wherever you're listening, that would be awesome. Let me know what you would like to hear more of, and also if there's anyone in particular that you'd like to see on the show. I hope you're all doing well, and thank you again for listening.